Welcome to the Baptist Broadcast. Thank you for tuning in through Spotify, iTunes, no matter where you're coming in through. We are grateful to have you. If you're watching on YouTube, please click subscribe before you go any further in the video if you have not already, and click the bell for continued notifications. That's how you can get notifications whenever I post new content on here. Also, do not forget to visit joshsummer.substack.com. That is the place where you can subscribe to my newsletter. You can either get that for free, the free version, or you can subscribe and you can get a little bit of extra content through there as well. But what that helps me do is to produce content like this. There is an excellent episode lined up for today, so you guys are tuning in right in time to see an interview that I was privileged to do with Oliver Allmand-Smith, who is involved heavily in Institute of Reformed Baptist Studies on the UK side of things. And he's a trustee for the seminary over there on the UK side, and then also with a new project called Broken Wharf. BrokenWharf.com is a recent project that's just started over the last 2 weeks, and really the purpose of this episode, this interview, is to find out more about Broken Wharf. So glad you're here. We're going to talk a lot about BrokenWharf.com, but we're also going to talk a lot about the importance of confessionalism. So you have come to the right place today. I hope you enjoy this episode as I interview Oliver. God bless you guys. I've got a special guest on here with me today. Thank you all for tuning in and for listening. If you're listening on the podcast or if you're just tuning in through YouTube, thank you for being here. You are welcome here, and we're glad to have you. And I've got a special guest here with me today, Oliver Allmand-Smith, who is involved in a couple of different things that will be worth mentioning here, I think. But what I want to do is I just want, by way of introduction, to ask you, Oliver, just a little bit about yourself, where you're at, and a little bit about your ministry as well. If you could just tell us about those things.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be on the show with you today, and trust the Lord will bless you in all your labors.
Appreciate that.
I've been ministering here in the UK, just north of Manchester now for nearly 2.5 decades, at Trinity Grace Church. I'm married to Alison. We're blessed with 6 children. Yes, 6 children. And the eldest is 25. He's God willing, going to be married in April. So he'll be our first to be married. And then the rest are various ages down to 11 is our youngest, Isaac. So the Lord's been good to us. We're very, very thankful that all 5 of the older children are all baptized members of the church and walking with the Lord. We're so thankful for his goodness.
Amen.
And little Isaac is wrestling with some things at the moment, but we can see God working in his life too. So we're very thankful. Yeah. Good. So we've been here. The town is called Ramsbottom. That means Valley of Wild Garlic, believe it or not. Holding bottom simply means valley, and Rams, wild garlic. There you go. Believe that or not, as you may. It's an old Lancashire mill town. So going back 100, 150 years, lots of cotton mills and weaving mills and dyeing mills in the area because it's on the River Owell that goes into Manchester. But as I say, we've been here nearly 25 years, and we've seen God at work amongst us. One of the things that the Lord has done is to move the church in a confessional direction. So it was back in 2012 when we adopted the Second London as our confession. And we've been working on that ever since. What does it mean to be confessional, and how do we work that out in our life as a church? So that's been one of the great labors of our time here.
Yeah, that's encouraging to know. And that's going to be a major part of our discussion today, hopefully, is confessionalism and the importance of confessing the faith. And that's encouraging to hear that the Lord has blessed your ministry in that way, and the church there as a whole. Well, I've got a few questions for you. I sent them over to Darren. I don't know if you've received them, but they're all things that I'm sure that you're familiar with. And the first thing I want to do, and a big part of the reason that we're here, that we're having this conversation, is is the Broken Wharf website. And so I think what would be good is to first ask the question, what is the Broken Wharf website?
Okay. Well, Broken Wharf itself was launched just 2 weeks ago, after about 9 months of preparation. It was launched to establish confessional Baptist resources, to bring the resources of our confessional Baptist heritage together in one place and to seek to make them available. Primarily, obviously, we're UK based, so most of the print aspect of what we do is UK based, although we do send overseas to the States. But obviously the digital resources that we're also seeking to develop are then available across the world to anyone in any place who has an internet connection. So really what we're about is promoting the whole counsel of God Christianity that is found in the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith. That's what we're all about. We don't hide. We don't sort of slip this in through a back door. We don't say, hey guys, we're just kind of evangelicals in a very broad sense, but by the way, we're going to whack you with this confession once you get in. No, we're up front. That's what we're about, and that's what we want to do.
Yeah, one of the things I first noticed was how to what extent you really bring everything together. I think that that's very helpful, and has, I don't want to say it's been totally lacking. There are good men that have had some very, very helpful ministries to myself, and some helpful enterprises that have brought some things together. But this is quite extensive. I mean, I'm looking at the bookstore, and then you have the confession, of course, digitally, available online, which is always helpful for me, as a pastor, if I'm teaching Sunday school and preparing an outline for a sermon or something like that. I can always use that digital version, and there's been various digital versions out there, but I think the way y'all have it laid out is very, very helpful. So tell us a little bit about why you named the website Broken Wharf. What's behind that?
Sure. Part of it is just to be a bit quirky and to grab people's attention. It's not a usual name, but of course there's concrete reason behind it as well. And in September 1689, a date very familiar to many of us, more than 100 churches were represented by messengers in London, formally to confess the Second London Confession. The confession itself had been written in 1677, but of course that was at a time when the nonconformist churches were under oppression of King Charles II. And it was only in 1688, when William of Orange came to the throne along with Mary, that the Bill of Rights was brought in. And then in 1689, the following year, the churches meet together in London under their messengers to adopt the confession, formally to confess. This is what we believe together as churches. And the place where they met in London on the River Thames was called Broken Wharf. So for us, a wharf is an inlet on the river where boats would pull in, and where cargo could be unloaded or loaded, or passengers unloaded and loaded. And Broken Wharf is one of those places. You can see it today. It's still there. And this particular meeting house was the meeting house for Hansard Knowles. That's the guy with the weird surname, spelled Knollys, but we think it should be pronounced Knowles. We are English after all, so we're a bit weird. And he, along with Robert Steed, were the pastors of the church there, which was they were the host church for that General Assembly, the first General Assembly under the Second London Baptist Confession. And actually, interestingly, Hansard Knowles was one of the few who signed up to the First London of 1644 and the Second London of 1677. And that took place there in 1689. So Broken Wharf, because that's where they met, because it's an oldie-fashioned name, and because if you have a look at our logo, you'll see a ship going through a book and turning the books into waves. Ooh,
Yeah.
we spent a long time on that logo. I hope you like it.
Yeah. I do actually like it. It's a good one. The whole website's just beautiful. It's laid out really, really well. That nugget that you mentioned there at the end, where there are signatories from the first London on the second London, I think is very helpful as well. Kind of that perception today that, you know, you have your first London Baptists and then you have your second London Baptists, and they're, you know, two different camps with two, you know, substantially different confessions, and that's just not the case.
No, that simply won't do. I mean, we discussed this recently at IRBS, and we're very, very convinced that we should treat second London as an expansion and a development of first London. No way are these in competition. The second develops out of the first, and you see in second London repeatedly how they are using language from first London again. And you know, chapter 2, for example, on Doctrine of God, they're picking out language from first London. So Westminster is still the framework, but first London is there, consciously there in second London.
Yeah, and they even make allusion to that in the preface, you know, in the letter to the judicious and impartial reader, you know, that we felt the need, it was necessary, you know, to exposit these things a bit more. And it indeed was. I'm glad they did it. I want to talk a little bit about resourcement, and I guess before we jump into the topic of resourcement, it would be good just to preface by way of saying that there's a lot of resourcement happening in general, I think, right now, with regard to, you know, the doctrine of God. You have the the Thomist piece going on. It's kind of skylined conversation right now. And there's a lot of resourcement that's been able to take place over the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years that maybe hadn't taken place, you know, for a number of years before that point. And it's been so helpful in putting the pieces together and further contextualizing things like our confession, and kind of, you know, being able to enlighten, you know, 21st century Christians, 21st century Baptists, as to what's the actual authorial intent behind the words selected in, you know, things like the Westminster Confession of Faith and the Second London. You know, those words are all intentionally used. So what was the context behind them? It's been very, very important. So I just wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the idea of resourcement, Broken Wharf's, you know, part in that, and then also, you know, why it's so crucial that we continue that work.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. It's a really good one. Speaking from our own personal experience, it was back in 2008 when I first was introduced to the Second London Confession. And to cut a very, very long story short, I quickly realized this was home for me. And I'd been looking for home for a long time. And when somebody gave me this and said, read this, I read it and I said, yep, this is home. So from that point onwards, we realized it was absolutely essential to build this resource base. And certainly for the last 10 years, ever since we first invited Dr. James Renahan over to the UK to teach his symbolics course for us, we've been looking to make resources available in the UK. And Broken Wharf began really with that conviction. We need to make available in the UK resources that are at present only available in the United States. That's where we began. But as the whole project gathered momentum, we realized that the situation in the States is also fragmented, that there are different groups doing different things. And that across the world, and certainly here in the UK, there are materials being made available, but in a very fragmented, disconnected kind of way. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do at Broken Wharf is to bring together the best of these resources. So we are being extremely selective. We're not simply making available anything that is vaguely Reformed Baptist. We are looking for distinctly confessional material. We're looking for material that expounds the Second London, explains the Second London, develops it, and shows how this is really, and we'll come to this question in a minute, I think, biblical Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And as you quite rightly said, one of the things that excited us when we first met James Renahan was the way in which he had studied the confession and its context so carefully that he was able to show the reasoning behind all the words that were chosen. And remember, Second London comes at the end of a very, very long process that I certainly trace back in the Reformation period to the Augsburg Confession of 1530. That was the first confession of its kind, right the way through to 1677. But then, of course, we go back to the Church Fathers, and in between we have the medievalists like Anselm and Aquinas and so on, and they all play their part. So it's right at the end, it's at the zenith of a process. And what we want to do at Broken Wharf, we were only discussing this morning in one of our board meetings, is to bring together that entire process. So we're beginning in 1677 and that period, looking at what's going on there, but we want to stretch it back right to the fathers and show how this is biblical Christianity, and then forward through men like Benjamin Beddome and see how that Christianity develops in the period ensuing, obviously through to Carey and Spurgeon and beyond. So that's our objective, and it's been quite exciting. We've poured a lot of resources into this. We have Darren, as you know, working full time, and I think that's really important. This isn't something that a pastor is doing in his, quote, spare time.
Right.
We have lots of faithful men doing the best they can, but to be honest,
right.
if you're in pastoral ministry, you don't have the time to do this. So we have set aside full time to do this.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's a huge benefit and advantage, I think, of what you're doing here is that this is a concerted effort, and it's one that's focused, laser focused on the task at hand. You kind of mentioned how these things have been, kind of atomized in terms of, being brought together in different locations, and perhaps, even that might play into a little bit of some of the division that happens as well, because you have different entities producing different things and emphasizing. For example, we just mentioned the whole divide, or the supposed divide, between the First London and the Second London. And you have people that are actively teaching that that's the case. And so I think that brings into view the next question, which is why confessionalism is important. Why should, and even that topic is contested, right? I mean, that's a controversial thing to say that, we should subscribe to some extra biblical document and say, this is what I believe. Why is it important for Christians to subscribe to confessions?
Yeah, well, this is a massive question, and we can only just touch the surface of it, as I'm sure you appreciate.
Yeah.
But what I'd like to focus on in answering your question is the peculiar, and I mean that in the old sense of the word peculiar, the distinct qualities of a confession of the faith. And what a confession does is it both includes and it excludes, because it draws a boundary around the faith, because it draws a boundary around what we believe. It is deliberately inclusive and deliberately exclusive. It's not one or the other, it's both. So when you have a confession of faith, one of the things you are seeking to do is to include in that confession all those who are committed to biblical Christianity. And what the Second London does is it very deliberately draws the boundary as widely as possible to include as many as possible who want to confess the faith. Now, I often say to folk, if I pick this up here, this is my Bible. I often say to folk, there is only one Bible. We don't have two Bibles. We don't have the Bible and the really important bit of the Bible. Here's the really important bit of the Bible, and here's the Bible. And really, this bit, the Bible, we can set that aside, because all we really need is this really important bit here, which we can summarize very, very briefly. And that's the problem. What we need is the whole Bible. So what Second London does, it says, what does the whole Bible teach on all the really important truths that we need to build biblical churches in our generation? So you've got to include in that, what is the church, haven't you? You've got to include in that, how do you enter the church through baptism? You've got to include in that, what is the relationship of the church and our local churches to the civil government? You've got to include that. You've got to include, well, what are we doing when we gather and break bread and pour wine together? You can't just say, all we need is the doctrine of the scripture, the doctrine of God, the doctrine of Christ, and the doctrine of justification. That's it. You know, that's these 9 or 12 points of that are supposed to bring us together. It's not enough. We have to have the whole counsel of God. And if we don't confess the whole counsel of God, then what we are effectively saying to God is, you made a mistake when you gave us the whole Bible. We only need part of it. So the confession then is a statement of the whole counsel of God regarding all the things that matter.
Yeah.
But it's deliberately broad on some things. So it doesn't tell you, for example, how you go about fencing your communion table. It doesn't go about, it doesn't go into great detail on issues of eschatology. You know, are you a historic premillennialist? Are you a post-millennialist? Are you an amillennialist? I mean, I know what my conviction is, but the whole point is that the confession allows latitude upon these things. It doesn't tell you what your attitude should be towards those who have been baptized perhaps in a different method or means. You know, it tells you what biblical baptism is, but it doesn't then prescribe, and this is how you should relate to so and so and so and so and so and so. Right. So it's inclusive and it's exclusive. It excludes anybody who doesn't confess the whole counsel of God, but it includes all those who do. Right. And also in the fundamental doctrines, such as doctrine of God, it uses language which ties us in with our confessional Presbyterian brethren, Congregationalist brethren, who are one with us on those doctrines and with whom we may differ on, for example, ecclesiology, you know, baptism, Lord's Supper, and so on in different ways. So that's why, as we come together under a confession of faith, we are confessing the whole counsel of God. Yeah. And we need to do that as churches, as whole churches. It also undermines this hyper-individualism, which says, I can believe whatever I want to believe. Right. Me, my Bible in my prayer closet, and that's it. Yeah. Exactly. Right. We're not free to believe whatever we want. We're free to believe what the Bible teaches. Yeah. You know, talking about, you know, how the confession deliberately agrees and also deliberately disagrees is you know, kind of how I've responded in the past to those who say, well, the Second London is just copying the Westminster. It's plagiarism. Well, of course it is. I mean, in a sense, that's the whole project of church history and the development of our theology, not the development of objective theology as God gives it to us, but our understanding of it is building off of what has come before. And following the sound advice. It's a very, you know, Proverbs-esque sentiment and a very biblical thing to do. Follow the sound advice of those who have come before and those who we perceive to be more wise than we. And that's exactly the method that the Second London followed. So of course, you know, they're finding all of the Catholic doctrine, if we could use that term, in the Westminster. You know, so we're not going to change the doctrine of God. You know, we're not going to change the doctrine of the scriptures. But then even if you take that doctrine of God chapter, we're not going to change it, but we are going to state it in different words at points. Right. wonderful addition at the end of paragraph 3, for example.
Yes.
Doctrine of the Trinity is the foundation of all our communion with God and our comfortable dependence on him. We're pretty sure that that's John Owen's terminology from Savoy, which our Baptist fathers have used here. What a wonderful sentence. That's added. I mean, the first sentence of our confession, the Holy Scripture is the only sufficient, certain, and infallible rule of all saving knowledge, faith, and obedience.
Right.
All the Westminster When would have believed that, but that's not a sentence you'll find in Westminster.
Right.
So you're right. They're using Westminster as the basis because they want to say we are in the line of confessional orthodoxy. We're not these mavericks, freakos, extremists. We're not ranters, Quakers, Shakers, all these groups that were around in the 17th century.
Right.
And, all these accusations of baptisms naked at night and orgies going on. It's absolute nonsense. We are professionally orthodox. Look, in 80-90%, we're going to use exactly the same words as our Presbyterian brethren. But that makes the changes all the more significant.
Right.
And when changes, chapter 24, civil government, obviously very different. In the chapter 26, doctrine of the church, very different.
Very different. Yeah.
These areas, those differences then become very conspicuous, don't they?
Yeah. And when you take a chapter like 26, and you think about how it's one of the largest chapters in the confession. So obviously this was a very important area of Baptist theology, and there was a priority here in terms of we're going to state very carefully and accurately how why we disagree or the ways in which we disagree from Westminster. It turns out to be one of the longest chapters in the confession. Obviously, Baptist polity is very important to Baptists, or should be.
Baptist polity is important because it's biblical Christianity.
Right.
That's right. It. It's the Christianity of the Scriptures. Do we care? Does it matter? It matters. It really matters.
And if really matters.
Biblical churches, we really need to focus on it. And this is one of the problem of the broader evangelical groupings. They just never talk about these things.
Right.
As if they don't matter. I tell you.
Well, we're talking about, we're talking about
what's about.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about how the confession very intentionally excludes and includes, and it seems like now statements of faith are all about including as much, and it's a very one-sided kind of goal. It's to include as much as you can include, and there's very little exclusion, doctrinal exclusion. So I'm thinking about like the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 or the SBC or something like that, where there's a lot of vague or nebulous terminology there, and that's by design in some way to allow for as much inclusion as possible. And the inclusion, the way they go about providing such inclusion, actually I think creates more division. Interestingly enough, where the goal is supposedly unity, but you get down the line and you take a particular church, for example, and these issues that are actually incompatible with one another, that are allowed for according to the standard, which is the BFM 2000, come up within the context of a local church and just blows it apart because they didn't know where they stood on it in the first place. And that happens a lot here. I'm sure the same thing happens, in the UK.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine over here who wrote an article recently on the doctrine of particular redemption. And he said, look, is this secondary? Is it secondary? Does it matter? Well, so many Reformed people over here would say, I believe in particular redemption, but it's secondary. So I don't teach it. I don't preach it. I don't explain it. Well, if you don't teach, preach, and explain things to your congregation, what's going to happen to those doctrines in the next generation? They'll be lost. And then you think of the implication of that. What if the doctrine of particular redemption is lost completely? Well, then in the following generation, you're going to lose the gospel. Because although, as I love to say, an Arminian can be truly saved by faith in Christ, if an Arminian was right, then nobody could be saved.
Right.
Because if salvation ultimately depends on our decision, then Pelagius is wrong. The semi-Pelagians are wrong. Nobody will ever be saved. So these doctrines really do matter. They matter so much. We've got to believe them. We've got to teach them. And that is why we need to be confessional.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, my next question, I'll preface a little bit with my experience. My wife and I, this was probably, it sounded like a bad idea to a lot of people, but it actually worked out really well. In 2018, after I graduated, we took our 9-month-old. We had to get him a passport and everything, and we took him to England. And we just, the three of us, and my wife was pregnant at the time with our second. So
wow.
he technically came along as well. And we had a great time. We were there for 2 weeks, and we stayed mostly in the southern half. The furthest north we went was like Cambridge or something, maybe Oxford, depending on which one's further. And we had a good time. Dover, London, we hit London on Christmas Day when nobody was there. We were there in December, right? So London was cleared out. We could just drive around and not worry about traffic. So we had a good time. And the church that we went to there was at Jeremy Walker's church down in Maidenbower. And we had a good time of fellowship both times we attended there. But, driving around, I wondered just how, prolific Reformed or particular Baptist theology was in England, but perhaps this is a better question for the UK in general. Have you noticed kind of an uptick over the last, few years in interest when it comes to Reformed Baptist theology, maybe Reformed theology in general, but particularly, particular Baptist theology as it's stated in the Second London?
Yeah, firstly, just with regards to Jeremy Walker, he's a dear friend and brother, and we esteem him in the Lord and his labors there in London. We thank God for him. His book, The Life and Labors of Andrew Fuller, is available on our website. So if you'd like to pick that up, you'd be very welcome to do so. Yeah, has there been an uptick in interest? For sure. But it's from an extremely low base, and that's the point. So really, what we've seen in the latter part of the 20th century, in the early part of this century, is a very much a falling away of confessional conviction amongst Baptists. This process, Josh, that we were speaking about, of building a unity that is based on an ever diminishing foundation of truth, where the amount of truth we must share gets smaller and smaller and smaller in order to allow more and more people to get on, as it were. And it, as you quite rightly said, it leads tragically to the very opposite of what is intended. We have seen that process doing great harm and damage here. So obviously we have churches that go right back to the 17th century, many to the 18th century, that were founded on the Second London Confession, that have it as their deed, their confession written into their church constitution. And yet it's almost unknown in many of those churches.
Wow.
In many of the churches that do know something of it, it's vaguely in the background. It might be gathering dust on a shelf. It's very, very sad. Churches that have tried to hold on to some form of confessionalism, again, they've struggled, and the degree of conviction has waned massively. I've spoken to many men who've said, I've come to this church and we're seeking to see the confession take a higher place. The members don't know the confession. The leaders don't know it. It's lost. It's a bit like Josiah, we hug up this law. What is it? Many churches, it's like that. So when I say that there is an uptick in interest, but it is from an extremely low base. The thing that encourages us is that I think there is a growing awareness that experiment that you described, Josh, is failing. This broad, even conservative evangelical consensus is failing. A lot of the big institutions that promoted it are struggling. Some of them, maybe some big names that we can name now but won't, announced that they're shutting up shop. They're not holding conferences anymore. And I think this is part of a trend. A lot of the men who've led those movements have either gone further away to an even broader consensus, abandoning the label conservative, and seeking to be broader still. But those on the other side are coming back, I think, and recognizing that if only by having a robust confessionalism can we really hope to lay a proper solid foundation for the future and build biblical churches. You can't build a biblical church unless you're going to build it on the whole counsel of God. Isn't that what Paul said to the Ephesian elders in Acts 20? So I think there is an uptick, there is a growth in interest, but from a very low base. We're not deceived, we're not celebrating anything yet, but we do believe that we've picked up from that. We've all become experts in graphs, haven't we, over COVID season? So if it were a graph, I think we've hit the bottom. And we're picking up.
Starting to inch back up there. We're all statisticians, I guess, if you could say, after COVID. Well, good. No, that's encouraging to hear. Even with the the proviso that, of course, it's coming from a low base. It's going to be slow. Prayerfully, it's going to be steady. And that is good to know, so that we better know how to pray. The situation is really the same here in the U.S. I do get we have a lot of fence sitters, with the doctrine of God issue, but also with the confessionalism issue. A lot of people that are just, they're not recalcitrant. They don't know, and so they're kind of just sitting on the fence right now, seeing what the big names do and what they say, and they're trying to evaluate, hey, what are these guys saying over here? And they're trying to make up their mind, I think, according to conscience, which is good. In some sense, the fields are ripe for harvest in that regard. But it is, you're right. It's we're at the entry point, I think, right now. And I just pray that the Lord is, with everything that's gone on, over the last 2 years, there's been kind of a sifting, if you will. Churches shutting their doors altogether, churches going to completely online Zoom services, and we all know that that's not biblical Christianity. And so, there's been a lot of shakeup, and so I could only pray that the Lord is using all of that to set us up for a growth in knowledge and a return to His Word, and to consistently practice or follow out biblical teaching, which I think, includes confessionalism in large part, because again, what does the Bible teach? What do we believe the Bible teaches? The other thing I want to do is I want to look at because we've been mentioning how many resources there are already on Broken Wharf, and you guys are going to do more. And so can we talk a little bit about the bookstore? I know, myself, I have a confession to make. I buy books, and between the church building and my house, I have like 2 libraries. So I'm a huge book fan. You're probably going to add a customer with me, but a lot of my listeners love books. And the important thing is, of course, that we read them. We don't just have them on our shelves, but Broken Wharf already has several titles available, some old, some more contemporary. So could you just kind of describe a little bit about the situation of the bookstore at current?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we're very thankful for our American brethren. I don't want to butter you up too much, but we really are, in all seriousness. We're very thankful for good men. We've talked about James Renahan, his son Sam Renahan. His recent book on covenant theology is frankly outstanding.
Yes.
He's had a teaching course here. We're so thankful for him. Rich Barcelos and his work, Getting the Garden Right, his earlier works on the Decalogue, all coming from a confessional context. Better Than Beginning his sort of biblical theology, his theology of the Lord's Day. So thankful for him. James Dolezal, All That Is in God. We're so thankful for these men, and there are others. So we are publishing all these materials in the UK. We've had such wonderful support from men in the States there who want to support us in what we're doing and make the materials available here. So much of what we're doing in the UK is publishing that in the UK, making it available to UK readers, and those things are already available to you guys as well there in the States. But you will find them all together on our website. In addition to that, we are seeking to make available more works in coming days. So we're discussing at the moment the possibility of several volumes from Benjamin Bedham. And one of the ones that I'm really looking forward to in that series that will begin later this year, God willing, it is the one on his hymnody. I think as confessional Baptists, we steal from the Congregationalists like Isaac Watts, we steal from the Anglicans, we steal from the Presbyterians, and we just have a great hymnody of our own. And we need to tap into this, and Bedham really leads the way in that. He's a wonderful confessional Baptist over here in the UK. We're looking to publish works by Nehemiah Cox, Benjamin Keach, and others. So that is something we'll be seeking to do here in the UK. We're also hoping to launch a book soon on the subject of the believers' relation to the state, particularly in the light of the COVID pandemic and what we would see to be the overreach of authorities at times, but being nuanced about it, and this is the wonder about being confessional. When you look at things from a confessional perspective, you guard against novelty or extreme response. And while you're dead right, Josh, churches that are saying, well, we can do church differently, we can do church online. Well, that's just nonsense, isn't it? I mean, it's ridiculous. But equally, there are some more extreme responses on the other end. And we need to be careful. And the confession brings in a wonderful balance there. So we have a title coming out soon on that. So look out for that as well. Under God, Over the People, that one's called. And that will be coming from UK End, and we'll make that available. Now, as you've mentioned earlier on, there's also going to be a lot of material appearing digitally. So we're looking to have a weekly blog coming out. Some of those are going to be based on the confession itself. Some of those are going to be based on books that we have available on the website. Some will be comments on contemporary issues from a historical perspective. So we're hoping to have a weekly blog. And as well as that, Josh, we're going to be making more resources available. So you have Second London at the moment. We're going to be making First London available in the same way. And then we want to be making more of the historic confessions and more of the catechisms available as well over time. So yeah, sign up to our newsletter, and God willing, something new each week.
Yeah, for sure. And I would second that and encourage, listeners out there to do just the same. Go to brokenwharf.com and all the information is there. The bookshop's there. And so you can do that. You can do that there. Well, brother, it's been a joy to have you on. I think we. I think my 2-year-old's crashing the party here.
What's his name?
Augustine.
Hey, Augustine. Live up to your forefather in the faith.
That's right.
Understand the truth about the state of your heart.
That's right. Read Romans, and our oldest is named Oliver. So yeah.
I was named after Oliver Cromwell. So
yeah, that's what our oldest is. That's who our oldest is named after also, and that's the one. That's our oldest is who we took to the UK, and we I forgot where it was, which palace it was at. It was one of the palaces. it's either Kensington or it could have
Buckingham
been
Palace, Windsor Castle.
no, it could have been Hampton Court also. Cromwell's death mask was in there.
Oh.
And so I still got a picture of that. It's really neat. But and then we got the picture of my wife in front of one of the big paintings. I forget which place that was at, but I can later on with him I can look back at those pictures and I can tell him, this is the guy you're named after, and then teach him about him. So brother, it's been great to have you on, and I just we'll be praying for you and for Broken Wharf and for your church over there, also for the IRBS wing over there in the UK. That's just great to hear about that. The Institute of Reformed Baptist Studies is out there now. So thanks again for coming on, and we will hopefully talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. Every blessing to you.
You too, brother.